The night before my wedding, I signed a document that would permanently end my family's control over my life. No one noticed, no one suspected, and that was exactly the point. My name is Elena Brooks, and by this time tomorrow, I would legally become Elena Carter. But tonight, standing inside the gilded ballroom of the Hudson Crest Hotel in Manhattan, I was still the daughter my family believed they owned. The room shimmered with wealth. Crystal chandeliers poured warm light onto marble floors. Tables were dressed in ivory linen, heavy with silver cutlery, champagne flutes, and arrangements of white roses. Nearly 200 guests filled the space. Financiers, executives, political donors, old money families who spoke softly but watched everything. They thought this night was about celebration. I knew it was about exposure. At my side stood Daniel Carter, my fiancé, calm, steady, a cybersecurity architect whose career revolved around identifying unseen vulnerabilities. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, understated but precise, just like him. His hand rested gently against my back, grounding me when my chest tightened. Daniel didn't just love me. He understood me. He knew about my mother, Margaret Brooks, a woman who ruled through charm, guilt, and quiet threats disguised as concern. He knew about my sister, Leela, raised to expect sacrifice from everyone but herself. And he knew about my father, Thomas, who had perfected the art of silence while standing beside injustice. Across the room, Margaret moved gracefully from table to table, smiling, laughing, collecting praise like currency. She had always treated family like an enterprise, allocating resources where she saw the highest return. For decades, I had been the one paying the cost. Leela leaned casually at the dessert table, emerald gown clinging perfectly, champagne glass dangling from her fingers. She looked effortless, entitled, untouchable. That same look she'd worn my entire life whenever she wanted something that belonged to me. My father stood near the bar, quiet as always. People called him gentle. I called him absent. As the orchestra played softly, I introduced myself to guests, answering polite questions about my work as an interior designer. I design spaces that protect people, I said. They smiled, unaware how literal that statement was tonight. Every reflection in the mirrored walls felt like it was watching me, waiting, judging, expecting compliance. Daniel leaned in and whispered, "Are you sure?" I nodded. For 30 years, I had been trained to smooth conflict, surrender ground, absorb disappointment. But tonight, I wasn't reacting. I was executing. In my clutch rested copies of a trust agreement, notarized hours earlier, signed quietly, strategically, a legal boundary my family would hate and never be able to cross. I scanned the room once more, locking eyes briefly with my mother. She smiled at me, confident, certain I would behave as I always had. She didn't know that the version of me she controlled no longer existed. Tonight wasn't about rebellion. It was about permanence. And the first crack in their power had already formed.
Dinner progressed smoothly, almost too smoothly. Wine flowed, laughter rippled across tables. The orchestra softened conversations into a warm hum. Daniel's parents were called to the podium, and when they spoke, the room listened. Their gift announcement came with practiced grace. "As a celebration of this union," Daniel's father said, "we're gifting Elena and Daniel a penthouse at Grand Harbor Residences overlooking the Hudson." Applause erupted. Smiles widened. And then I felt it. The shift. Margaret's posture changed instantly. Her eyes sharpened. Calculation replaced celebration. She waited until the clapping faded, then approached me, voice honeyed and public. "Elena, sweetheart,"
she said, touching my arm lightly. "Don't you think that's a bit excessive for you?" Silence crept in. She continued smoothly. "You work from home. You're practical. But Lila, she's starting a new chapter. Media events, networking, a downtown lifestyle. A place like that makes sense for her." Forks froze midair. Champagne glasses hovered inches from lips. I looked at my sister. She didn't look surprised. She looked expectant. This was the moment they'd rehearsed in their heads for years, when I would step aside for the good of the family. I smiled gently. "I understand." Margaret relaxed instantly. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to feel intimate. "You've always been generous. That's what makes you special." Special. Their favorite word for disposable. Lila shifted closer, testing. "You're not saying no, are you?" The room waited. Daniel's hand pressed firmly against my back, silent support, no interference. I let the moment stretch, because this time I wasn't surrendering. I was measuring. Every expectation, every assumption, every ounce of entitlement. Finally, I said, "Families share, but sharing works both ways." A flicker crossed my mother's face, confusion quickly masked. She hadn't heard resistance from me in decades. She laughed lightly, dismissively. "Oh, darling, don't make this difficult." Difficult. The word echoed through every memory of opportunities I'd given up. Scholarships, savings, promotions, all redirected toward Lila's desires. I folded my napkin carefully. "Excuse me," I said, calmly. I stood, reached into my clutch, and withdrew the documents. And just like that, the narrative shifted. The silence that followed my words was deafening. 200 people stood frozen beneath crystal chandeliers, champagne glasses hovering midair, forks paused halfway to lips. Even the orchestra faltered, the soft music dissolving into an awkward hush as every eye in the Grand Meridian Ballroom turned toward me. My mother's smile didn't disappear, it fractured. Diane Carter stared at the document resting on the table between us like it was a foreign object, something dangerous and unfamiliar. Her fingers twitched, just once, before she smoothed her pearls and laughed lightly. "Oh, Emily," she said, her voice sweet and condescending, "you always overthink these things." Vanessa shifted beside her, emerald dress clinging like armor, eyes sharp with calculation. She had already decided how this would end. She always did. "You're really going to make this awkward?" she said lazily. "In front of everyone?" I stood. Not abruptly, not angrily. Calmly. Ethan's hand pressed gently against my lower back, steady, grounding. He said nothing. He didn't need to. We had already built this moment brick by brick. "This isn't awkward," I said evenly. "This is clarity." I lifted the document and turned, letting the light catch the embossed seal. The penthouse gifted to Ethan and me has been placed into an irrevocable trust. We are the sole beneficiaries. Any attempt to access, transfer, occupy, or claim it without our direct, notarized consent constitutes fraud. A ripple passed through the room. Diane's eyes darkened. "That's absurd," she snapped, dropping the pretense. "You're my daughter. Families don't hide assets from each other." Vanessa smirked. "Relax, Mom. She's bluffing." She stepped away from the table, heels clicking softly against marble, moving toward the private service hallway that led to the penthouse elevators. She didn't know. That was the tragedy of entitlement. It assumes immunity. Ethan leaned toward me, whispering, "She took the bait." Every camera activated, every sensor logged, every second time-stamped and uploaded in real time. Vanessa reached the elevator panel and swiped the bronze key she'd lifted earlier, the decoy I'd planted deliberately. The alarm didn't scream. It didn't flash. It simply logged. Silently, precisely. Her phone buzzed, then Diane's, then my father's. Diane glanced down, color draining from her face. "What is this?" she hissed. Before I could answer, the ballroom doors opened. Two uniformed officers stepped inside. Calm, professional, unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa froze, panic cracking her polished expression. "Emily," Diane whispered sharply, "what have you done?" I met her gaze, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with something far more terrifying. Finality. "I protected myself," I said. The officers approached, one addressing Diane directly. "Ma'am, we have evidence of attempted unlawful access to a secured property, corroborated by digital surveillance and legal documentation. You'll need to come with us." Vanessa's breath hitched. "This is insane. She's lying." The officer held up a tablet. 4K footage played silently. Vanessa at the elevator, the key, the timestamp, the biometric scan. There was nowhere to look, nowhere to hide. My father said nothing. He never did. As they were escorted out, Diane turned once more, her voice shaking for the first time in my life. "You did this to humiliate us?" I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "You did this to yourselves." The doors closed behind them. The silence lingered, then slowly dissolved into murmurs, whispers, disbelief. I exhaled. 30 years of guilt left my lungs in one breath. Ethan turned me toward him, eyes warm, proud. "Are you okay?" he asked. I smiled. Not small, not polite. Free. I've never been better. The music resumed. Lights softened. The night reclaimed its celebration. As Ethan and I stepped onto the dance floor, surrounded by applause and stunned admiration, I realized something profound. I hadn't won because I trapped them. I won because I finally stopped letting them in. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't their daughter. I was my own. I didn't follow Leela when she slipped away from the ballroom. I didn't need to. For most of my life, I had chased after her messes, smoothed her mistakes, absorbed the fallout of her entitlement. Tonight, I stayed exactly where I was, seated beside my husband, spine straight, expression calm. Because the trap didn't require pursuit. It required patience. Across the room, conversations continued, unaware that a silent chain reaction had already begun. The string quartet played softly, bows gliding in synchronized elegance, while servers cleared plates and refilled glasses. Everything looked normal. But beneath the polished surface, the system Daniel built was already working. His phone vibrated once, then again. He didn't look at it immediately, neither did I. That restraint, that stillness, was new for me. 30 years of conditioning had taught me to react instantly, to fix things before they broke. Tonight, I let things break. Finally, Daniel glanced down. His eyes met mine. "They took the bait," he said quietly. I felt my pulse spike, but my expression didn't change. Unauthorized access attempt. Biometric mismatch. Internal drawer breach. Timestamped. Recorded. Leela had found the decoy key. She had tried to use it, and now the system had everything. Seconds later, my phone buzzed. Then my mother's. Then my father's. Margaret froze mid-conversation, her smile slipping just slightly as she glanced at her screen. The color drained from her face so fast it was almost theatrical. She turned away from her guests, fingers tightening around her phone. "What is this?" she whispered sharply. Her voice wasn't sweet now. It was afraid. My father looked over her shoulder, reading the message, confusion quickly turning to panic. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, as useless in crisis as he had always been. Leela reappeared near the service corridor, eyes wide, breath shallow. She looked around frantically, searching for an ally, a rescuer, someone who would intervene like they always had. No one moved, because this time the consequences didn't belong to me. They belonged to her. Security entered the ballroom calmly, professionally, not aggressive, not rushed. 2 officers approached Margaret. Another moved toward Leela. Margaret raised her voice immediately. "This is absurd. You can't do this. This is a family matter." I stood. The sound of my chair sliding back cut through the room sharper than any shout. "No," I said clearly. "This is a legal one." 200 faces turned toward me. I walked forward slowly, deliberately, heels steady against marble. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The penthouse is protected under a private trust. Any unauthorized access attempt triggers automatic reporting, evidence preservation, and legal escalation. Margaret stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. "You wouldn't," she hissed, "on your wedding night?" I met her gaze. "I already did." Leela began crying, not quietly, not with remorse, but with outrage, the kind of crying that came from shock, from disbelief that the rules no longer bent for her. "This is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you did," I replied calmly, "and now it's documented." The officers escorted them out. No shouting, no drama, just quiet, devastating finality. My father followed, head down. For the first time in my life, they left a room because of me, not because I cleaned up after them, but because I refused to. The doors closed behind them, and something inside my chest finally loosened. The ballroom didn't erupt immediately. Silence lingered, thick, stunned, heavy with realization. Then the lights shifted. Soft gold replaced sharp white. The orchestra lifted their bows again, tentative at first, then confident, as music gently reclaimed the space. Life resumed. But something fundamental had changed. I stood there, breath steady, heart pounding, waiting for the familiar guilt to flood in, the shame, the doubt, the urge to apologize. It never came. Instead, I felt light. Daniel stepped beside me, his hand finding mine. Warm, solid, real. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "I'm free." That was the truth. Not victorious, not vengeful. Free. We walked to the center of the floor as the music swelled, and when Daniel pulled me into the first dance, I felt something release deep in my bones, decades of tension unwinding with every step. Around us, guests slowly joined in, conversations resuming in hushed amazement. No one asked questions, no one interfered. Some smiled at me with admiration, others with shock. I didn't care. For the first time, I wasn't managing anyone's perception. I was living inside my own. As we danced, memories surfaced. Not painful ones, but resolved ones. The nights I stayed silent so others could shine. The opportunities I surrendered. The way I learned to make myself small so others could feel large. That version of me was gone. I rested my head briefly against Daniel's shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "This is our beginning," I whispered. No interference, no compromise. The confetti cannons fired, white and gold drifting through the air like snowfall. Laughter rose, applause followed. The night belonged to us now. Later, as the celebration stretched into laughter and movement, I caught a glimpse of the open terrace doors. Beyond them, the Manhattan skyline glowed, endless, alive, full of possibility. The city didn't care about my past, and neither did I anymore. My family had tried to take something that wasn't theirs, not just property, but control, and they had lost everything they used to wield over me in the process, not because I fought them, but because I stopped letting them define me. Daniel squeezed my hand. "You drew the line," he said. I smiled. And it held. That night didn't end in chaos. It ended in clarity, in music, in freedom. And as I danced beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by people witnessing the moment my life finally became my own, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never be controlled again.